It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second part of the crash course International Marketing. This second video lecture is about segmenting and selecting international markets. If you like to brush up your knowledge with regard to segmenting and targeting in general, I recommend you use the second section, the second video lecture from the crash course Marketing, which you find on my website godperson.online. If you would like to dive deeper into international marketing selection and targeting, I recommend the book Global Marketing by Hollandson and Bogdanovich. Very briefly, what is segmenting and targeting in general? Segmenting is gathering information about an overall market, then analyze this information and cluster the market into submarkets, which are called market segments and are also your potential target groups. Now, after segmenting, you have potential market segments you might want to cultivate. But which of these market segments you cultivate and you approach, that is what you decide with targeting. Simply selecting the market segments that you go for. In other words, you determine who is your target group. And these two steps, segmenting and targeting, are very important for your overall business and your overall marketing. In this context, I would like to highlight that it is not you as a manager who determines, I have to say, who eventually determines if your company or your brand is successful. The customer is the one who eventually determines if your brand or company is successful by buying or not buying your brand. And as the customer needs to like your brand, in other words, he or she needs to get a value out of this, it's very important who is your customer. That means that the positioning of your brand or your company depends on who is your company, who is your target group. So the result of segmenting and targeting your markets. Let's go into the process, what you do in segmenting and targeting international markets. You should analyze the political and economic environment, of your target markets and the broader global situation, plus additionally the cultural environment. And you look at regions and countries across the globe. For this, you primarily use secondary data. Secondly, you need to analyze the needs, wants, lifestyles, etc. of your target group within the aforementioned international regions or countries. For this, you normally need primary research. Based on this information, you select your target markets and you're looking at the market potential. So how much money can we make? What is our expected profit and revenue? And there you normally use the technique of forecasting. Secondly, you need to look at the risks you're facing in your target regions or countries, as unfortunately nothing in life is without risk, and there you should apply scenario planning. Finally, you need to decide on your timing, in other words, your market entry sequence, and there your company's resources and competencies come into play. If you remember, or if you've watched and remember the first video lecture of this series, I highlighted the framework conditions of international marketing, being the political and economic environment, the cultural environment, and additionally, your own company's resources and competencies. And here they come back again in the segmenting and targeting process. I have to mention a bit of a caveat when it comes to these processes or these steps. Please do not see them as a strict linear process. That wouldn't be correct. It is rather a circular process than that you have to, if you're on a step further down, you have to go back to a step before. And furthermore, these steps are rather overlapping. Anyway, let's have a look at analyzing the political, primarily the political and economic environment through secondary data. What is our objective when using secondary data? So, with regard to the political and economic environment, we want to understand the environment for a business with regard to the home country, so the country we are coming from, and potentially third countries. Normally, what is more important is that we understand the political and economic environment for a target country. And through this, we can find the business opportunities and risks in this target country. Highly recommended is a deductive research process. Deduction means coming from a general point of view, or coming from the general and going to the specifics. So firstly, we want to get a general understanding of the target country's environment. What political system do they have? What is the economic system? Is it rather a centrally planned economy? Is it a free market economy? Or the political system? Is it a democracy? Is it an autocratic system? And so forth. How is the economic development of the country? Is it a high income, a low income country, a middle income country? Are there any trade barriers? And so forth. When we're having this framework, we go a step deeper, more to the specifics, and we want to have a detailed understanding of the industry we are in, and with regard to the target country. What's the revenue potential? Who are the competitors? How are the market prices? And so forth. And based on the general understanding of the framework or the environment, a more detailed understanding of our industry within the country, we can deduce the business opportunities and risks. There are many potential sources, and I cannot give you an exhaustive list. However, what you can use is governmental information. For instance, mentioned in the first lecture, the CIA Factbook. Wonderful tool to get a good understanding of the basics and a bit more of each country on this planet. Official statistics, like the Office for National Statistics in the UK, and so forth. You have business economics and business intelligence agencies. For instance, the Economist Intelligence Unit. There are trade associations, like the British Chamber of Commerce. But you will definitely, virtually with certainty, you have to go in case specifically. And you do internet research, for instance. If you want to look up import-export agents, then you have to find the information individually. Now, I've mentioned regions and countries. So should you look at regions in the world or should you look at countries? The answer is, it depends. And I would like to elucidate on this using the example of the European Union. When making business in the European Union, should we have an overall European Union approach, or should we have a country approach, targeting Germany, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, Greece, and whatever country is in the EU? How should we go in? So an overall EU approach to segmenting and targeting has a very positive side effect, is not the right word, but has a very strong argument for it. It simplifies. And keep it simple and strong is never bad advice in life. So we have a simplification and we're utilizing the economic integration of the European Union. On the negative side, the countries are rather different with regards to their culture and also their economic conditions within the European Union. For instance, if you see on the right hand side, this is the scores of the Hofstadter model for Sweden and Portugal, and you see the scores navy blue is Sweden, maroon Portugal. They are rather different, so you cannot say the Europeans have a really close shared culture. And also Sweden is very well developed industrially, economically. Portugal is not a poor country, don't get me wrong, but in comparison with Sweden, they are quite a few years behind. So there is a negative. This negative you won't have if you have a country approach. Then you take into consideration the economic differences and the cultural differences. But on the negative, on the minus side, it is more complicated. Now, what you can do, you can bring these two approaches together. And then, in such an hierarchical approach of segmenting and targeting, you first look at the regions in the world. In this example, we look at the European Union, analyze the European Union, and then, secondly, we go into the specific of each country, like Germany, France, Sweden, the Netherlands, Italy, and so forth. And you can apply this to other regions in the world. You might say, let's look how the Middle East, if there is a market potential in the Middle East. And then first you look at the Middle East as a whole, and then you look at Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, the Emirates, and so on, to have the country specifics within your analysis. Now, secondly, primary research. And this is what you do primarily to go a bit more into detail, not to go a bit more into detail, to get a detailed understanding of what are the needs and wants, what's the lifestyle, and what other characteristics you need to find out, who are very specific, or rather specific. So you would use primary market research. Here you see the market research process in general. Firstly, when you're doing market research, when you're conducting market research, you set your research objectives. And that is what you're not doing because of a gut feeling or how the weather is like. But you're doing this based on secondary data and because of your internal requirements that you need, so the things you need to know to conduct business internationally. Secondly, you define your research design. And normally you look at sampling. How much participants do we want to have in our sample? And how can we recruit the participants? Furthermore, you have to ask yourself, how do we want to collect the data? When do we collect the data? And what medium do we use? Is it an online questionnaire? Is it face-to-face? And so forth. Now, the planning process, it depends if you go for qualitative research or if you go for quantitative research. Qualitative research makes very much sense when you cannot determine hypotheses or a model, you cannot deduce hypotheses or a model out of secondary data. So qualitative research aims to generate hypotheses primarily through qualitative interviews. As I said before, the knowledge that you have must be rudimentary. In other words, one could say it cannot be. So a model or a hypothesis cannot be deduced from secondary data. If you can do this, if you can deduce hypotheses from secondary data, so if you quite clear cut out research objectives, you should conduct quantitative research because there you test hypotheses. That's what you normally do through surveys, like an online survey and so forth. If you want to dive deeper into how to conduct empirical research, I recommend my website, godperson.online. There you find some crash courses, also video-based, like quantitative research papers, foundations of quantitative research, or analyzing qualitative interviews. It's all on the academic side, but if you understand the academic side, you can translate this into commercial market research quite well. Now, as we have planned all our research, of course we need to collect the data, analyze the data, and then draw our conclusions to make decisions of how to operate internationally. So this research process in international markets. What we want to do is having two major decisions or phases, processes. Firstly, we want to define our market research process. Ideally, we want to have an international marketing information system. And this process or information system should be rather standardized over all countries that we're targeting across the globe, so that we can compare the data and have a good understanding of what is going on before we enter a market all over the world, and afterwards when we're operating there, to see how markets develop. But countries are different with regards to their political and economic environment, and arguably more important with regard to their culture. So we need to localize our research process or a marketing information system. Localize means we need to adapt to the culture and the circumstances of our target countries. On the bottom left, you see the market research process that I've just explained on the slide before. And I highly recommend you have a mixed team working on this. You have your internal market research experts. First of all, they know the objective of market research and then know what information is required coming from your company. But also they should have a very sound understanding of market research, how the methods work, and so on. Because of the cultural and also the hard facts, the economic and political circumstances that differ, you should also integrate external market research experts. And the main objective here is that they can provide you with the information that is necessary to succeed with your market research in countries and cultures that are different to your own. I want to exemplify or elucidate why these external market research experts are quite important and are important more and advised more often than not, through the potential challenges that you might face in international markets. So potential challenges is a lack of up-to-date official statistics, and that might be a problem when it comes to sampling. So in the UK, the National Office for Statistics, or the Office for National Statistics, can provide you with very good information how the British population is made up. But in countries like the Congo or Malawi, it is slightly more fussy, the data, if you have data at all. You might have non-response patterns because of cultural differences. So in a Western culture, it's not a problem for a woman to go to a market research interview. Some Middle Eastern cultures, and also other cultures around the world, it is difficult to get a woman to be interviewed in a market research project. So it might be a bit of a problem. Furthermore, there are cultural differences and there are language differences. Especially in the first lecture of this series, I talked about the cultural differences quite a bit. Here, I would like to exemplify with an example of two countries where you might think at first glance there can't be a difference: the United Kingdom and the United States. So the language is used in parts quite differently. If a polite and well-educated Englishman tells you, "Oh, I'm in a rather sticky situation," it does not mean something like, "Oh, it's not ideal, but it's okay." So with overly plain words translating this to a down-to-earth American, that means the shit hits the fan. There's an example from the Korean War when exactly this happened. So in the Korean War, there was American division, and on one of the flanks was the British brigade. And then comes a massive assault from the Chinese. And human wave after human wave was thrown at the British brigade. The American general called the British brigadier and asked, "How's the situation?" And the British brigadier said exactly, we're in a bit sticky situation. What's a rather sticky situation? The American general thought, "Yeah, it's war. It's a bit sticky, all right. Oh, they will get on with this." No, it took a lot of bravery and far too many casualties to hold the line for the British unit there, for the British brigade, which probably could have been averted, all of the casualties, if the British brigadier and the American general were a bit more aware of the cultural differences, and the British brigadier would have said something like, "We are near to collapse," and not, "It's a rather sticky situation," or the American general would have known what a rather sticky situation means in Britain. Anyway, another example. It's absolutely fine to say in the US, "I fell on my fanny." Then you fell on your bum. I can strongly advise you, do not say this in Britain. Fanny has a much more intimate meaning, referring to a female body part. So that is something you don't say in Britain. As mentioned before, how can you mitigate such problems? I mentioned before, involve market research experts who are familiar with the circumstances and especially with the culture of your target country where you conduct your market research. Secondly, your questionnaire. Have your questionnaire in your home language, because you know this is what we want to know. Then have it translated by a native speaker being a speaker from your target country, and then have a back translation into your home country language to see, does this questionnaire actually bring us the information we want to have? These are two approaches, they go hand in hand, but two approaches that will help you to mitigate some of the problems, especially language and cultural problems mentioned on this slide. Now let's go to forecasting to determine the market potential, meaning what is the profit and revenues we can make. The objective of forecasting is, probably this is already clear, we want to determine the sales that we can make in a target country so that we can deduce the expected revenue and profit. You have two approaches, direct forecasting and indirect forecasting. Direct forecasting means you have a trend analysis, and that is based on the past trends. So because of the past development of sales, this is how the market will develop. Normally, you need to be already operating in this target market. Thus, if you're not, normally indirect forecasting is the better approach. And you have two steps. You determine the overall market development, and then you determine your market share, or the share that is likely you can gain. I'll give you a few techniques that you can use, combine, and of course, you have to go deep. So you have to go, normally it's a bit more complex, but these forecasting techniques can help you as an approach. Forecasting by proxy indicators, chain ratio method, lead lag method, and estimation by analogy. Forecasting by proxy indicators, you simply use similar or related indicator to your product, and if you look at this from the demand side, buying behavior to predict your sales. For example, you want to sell washing machines, you might assume that the sales of washing machines corresponds with the sales of fridges. The chain ratio methods combine several factors and calculates expected sales. So let's assume again we want to determine the market potential for washing machines. We have a country with 20 million households. We know that 80% of the households have running water, and we now 50% have electricity. Two conditions that you need to have for running a washing machine. Then we multiply our 20 million households with 80%, and again with 50%, which leaves us with 8 million households maximum market potential. And again, I need to emphasize, this is all for exemplification reasons, very much simplified. You can have such calculations over 3 Excel sheets or even more. You probably have to put a bit more effort in, but this is about making the principle and the method clear. The lead lag method simply uses the past development of a product in an existing market, a market we're already operating in, and then transferring this development of a target market that shows similar characteristics of like our original market, So then we know in our original market or home market, we have these sales, and the target market, which might be a bit smaller in size, we can expect these curve of sales that you see on the right hand side. Finally, estimation by analogy. We're comparing the characteristics of an existing market, similar to the method before, or the technique before, with the characteristics of a target market, and then we calculate the expected sales. For instance, we're coming from the UK or operating in the UK, which has a population of roughly 69 million inhabitants. Sales are 1 million. I want to go to Germany. Population there is roughly 83 million. And then we calculate 1 million sales that we have in the UK times 83, the German population, divided by the United Kingdom population, 69, equals 1.2 million. So the market potential in Germany, according to this technique, is 1.2 million. What you definitely should do is a more detailed approach and calculating or conducting a value analysis to see how much money can we actually get out of the target market. And to determine a value analysis, you should calculate the net present value. As mentioned before, the principle of this value analysis is determining the expected financial value of each potential market for a given product. The potential market normally in international business is a country. And then you select these countries, the countries with the highest positive value. At least they should have a positive net present value, so they do not turn a loss in these countries. The net present value is calculated, as you see, with this equation. It's basically the value your business model in the foreign country has today. So you calculate all the future cash flows you're getting in. What does it mean? What value would it be today? If you go into a foreign market, you have to come up with some initial investment. Potentially, you have to modify your product. You need to cultivate the market entry cost. So you have minus initial investment. And then you add up the profit, the cash flow, or the profit in essence, of the future years. Profit is revenue minus cost. You add them up over the future years, but you have to discount your profits. Money in the future is normally has a lower value than it has today. That's what we call inflation. So what 10 pounds buys me today, they will not buy in 2, 3, 4 years. I will get less for it. Furthermore, you have opportunity cost. You do not need to invest in some target market abroad. You can get your money, put it into the bank for a fixed, virtually secure interest rate. And because of inflation and opportunity cost, you need to discount your future profits. And in the denominator, you see the discount factor 1 plus I is the interest to the power of t being the future years. So first, the equation basically is initial investment for entering a foreign market, it's a minus, plus the profit we make, the discounted profit we make in the years to come. Very important to note here, this value analysis can only be as successful as the accuracy of your revenue and cost projections. You will never be on point and you never have absolute certainty, but you need to strive after the best possible accuracy. Furthermore, you should have an internal view into your company and see if there are some synergy effects. The keyword here is economies of scale. And I would like to give you a rule of thumb. Plan for maximum 10 years. That's what I've heard a lot of companies are doing, as they are saying we cannot go further and cannot possibly predict what is past 10 years in the future. So rule of thumb, plan for 10 years, and within 10 years you make a profit. Happy days. If not, don't go for this market. Let's come to the risk assessment and scenario planning. With forecasting, we wanted to find out what money can we make. Scenario planning looks at the risk and possible developments. How can our revenue and our profit deviate from the forecasted path? And you look at, as mentioned in the first video lecture of this series, you look at ownership risk and operating risk. Ownership risk is there might be a change of government, some socialists come into power and they want to nationalize your investment within the target country. Operating risk might be corruption, slow bureaucracy, and so forth. So what you do in risk assessment scenario planning, it is you look at possible events or developments on a political and societal level that might occur. In conjunction with this, you look at the probability these events might occur. Then you deduce what impact these events have on your business. On the fourth step, you look at, do we have or can we develop any contingency plans and risk mitigation measures? Finally, you need to decide, after having your markets, after scenario forecasting, scenario planning, you're having your markets and your countries you want to go in, you need to decide, when do we go in? What is our sequence? Well, you have two approaches. Of course, again, it's rather gradual than categorical, but you have two approaches. An incremental market entry approach, which is called waterfall approach, and simultaneously market entry approach, shower approach. The market entry, an incremental market entry approach, you go step by step. First one country, then the next, then the next, then the next, then the next, and not simultaneously. And typically, when coming from a highly developed country, a high income and highly developed country, you normally go with your product first into your home market and other highly developed countries like UK, US, Germany, Sweden, and so forth. Then you go into developing countries like India, China. And thirdly, you go into less developed countries like Congo or Malawi. On the other hand, you can go into the whole world, and every country simultaneously. With this example, you go simultaneously in highly developed countries, developing and less developed countries. There are pros and cons with this. With the incremental market approach or market entry approach, you are learning by doing. So, generally speaking, you can plan in advance and analyze whatever you want and how good you are at this. You will not be perfect and you will overlook something. Reality is slightly different than you thought reality is. So it is normally, especially for smaller companies, it's a good idea to go step by step. You learn from your first market entry and you can improve on the second and the third. So you have a lower risk for a malinvestment. But you also have the risk to be very slow onto the market and you're slower to substantial growth and you might miss out on global market leadership. On the other hand, the simultaneous market approach or market entry approach, where you go through all of the countries or virtually all of the countries at the same time, that has some benefits. If you do it right, you quickly generate substantial profits and very early, and you can develop global market leadership. But you need to be on point. You need to be right. If you get something rather fundamentally wrong, you have sunk a lot of money. So the risk for malinvestments is very high. Typically speaking, an incremental market entry approach is better suited for companies that have not so much international business experience and competencies, have not so many financial resources, and companies want to avoid risks. Whilst a simultaneous market entry approach, that might be the option for companies with lots of resources, lots of competencies when it comes to international business, more larger companies, and companies who are rather fine with taking some risks. That was segmenting and selecting international markets. On the next section, the next video lecture, I'm talking about creating value in international markets. It's about the product and price policy in international markets. Until then, I wish you all the best, and it is bye-bye for now.